I am delighted to introduce to you Dr. Marifran Mattson, Professor and Head of the Brian Lamb School of Communication. Professor Mattson emphasizes the scholarship of engagement by exploring the intersection of designing, implementing, and evaluating health communication campaigns, health advocacy initiatives, and service learning pedagogy. Prior to being called into academic administration and following a serious accident, Dr. Mattson and her students initiated the Motorcycle Safety at Purdue campaign, which integrated her professional interests. She was also involved in passing legislation that mandates health insurance companies to provide coverage for prosthetics in Indiana. Professor Mattson is a co-author of 3 books and has had her research published in several academic journals. Welcome, Dr. Mattson.
Thank you, Andrea, and good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Brian Lamb School of Communication, I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us for the Center for C-SPAN Scholarship and Engagement Research Conference. This is our 2nd virtual conference, but our 8th conference overall. Before I introduce our featured guest this morning, I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about the CCSE, and I want to talk with you a little bit about how you can stay engaged with the center. Back in the fall of 2017, the Lamb School launched the Center for C-SPAN Scholarship and Engagement while we were also celebrating the 30th anniversary of the C-SPAN Archives, which is located adjacent to Purdue. The CCSE is designed to encourage and assist in the integration of the C-SPAN archives in college and university level research, teaching, and community engagement. I so appreciate the CCSE receiving support from all kinds of folks, including our Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, Dr. David Reingold, the CCSE Advisory Committee of faculty from the Lamb School, from the Departments of History and Political Science, and the Honors College, and faculty, including our faculty director, Robert Browning, staff and student colleagues in the Lamb School and around the College of Liberal Arts. I also want to thank C-SPAN and the C-SPAN Foundation for supporting this research conference and the CCSE over the years. I also want to acknowledge our recently retired CCSE Managing Director, Connie Debley, who was instrumental in standing up the CCSE and helping us create many of the initiatives and being intricately involved in them. These initiatives include the Civics Literacy Podcasts, the CCSE Student Community, our internship program, our Boilers Go to Washington, D.C. summer program, Pizza and Politics, election night watch parties, etc., etc. She also has co-taught courses with Brian Lamb. We miss you already, Connie, but your legacy will live on in the CCSE. I also want to give a shout out to our current managing director, Andrea Langrish, who is filling big shoes, but she's already showing that she's very much up to the challenge. Thank you, Andrea. Now, for ways that you can stay engaged with the CCSE, you can continue attending this conference and telling your students and colleagues about it. You can encourage your undergraduate and graduate students to apply to Purdue to study political communication, political science, political history, etc. You can share our open positions in the CCSE or related to the CCSE. We have a current position for an associate program administrator, and we also have a full professor position in political communication. You can stay in touch with us via social media and our website, and you'll find more information through our social media and website about the initiatives I just talked about. And then, of course, don't ever hesitate to reach out and share any ideas you have. Some of those ideas are actually incorporated into this research conference, previous research conferences, and our initiatives. Now, without further ado, I want to introduce Brian. It's my distinct pleasure to do so. In addition to being the guy who founded C-SPAN back in 1979, to me, Brian is the guy who agreed to put his name on the Department of Communication here at Purdue. He's also the guy who was so inspiring when I visited C-SPAN for the first time about 10 years ago. He's also the guy who came to my class and so intently listened to what my students were up to and then talked with them very candidly. And he's also been very supportive of me, the Lamb School, and the CCSE. So I both want to thank Brian and introduce him to you. Brian?
Dr. Mattson, it's been a great couple of years as she's run this communications department. I'm not an academic, so I learn about academia through Marifran and others on the screen. I have to say that Jen Hall and Lindsay Anderson, I've dipped into the book that you wrote, the second edition of the book that you wrote for Speech 114 at Purdue. I took 116, which is the same course. That's what they called it 800 years ago. But there's a couple of lines here I want to read as we begin this discussion today, because it says it all. It's at the beginning. The abundance of information we face is called information overload. And it is problematic for a couple of reasons. First, it causes stress at the individual, organizational, and societal levels. And I don't think there's probably anybody on the screen that disagrees with what you say. The fun thing about your text is that you use the C-SPAN archive using the code readers, and be anxious to hear you later on today on how that works out. But to start with, and this is going to be interactive, I'm not going to give a speech. I want to hear what you all have to say about the current world that we live in and communications. I want to start with Robert Browning. Robert, tell us what you expected when you invented the archive. What did you expect it to accomplish?
Well, we felt that C-SPAN material was so important as primary source documents. And it wasn't like a regular television. You knew that, you founded it to be that way. And so we felt that there would be so much that could be done, television is so ephemeral. You can go to the library and find old newspapers, but you can't find old telecasts. And so we felt that was important, to preserve it, to organize it. And we felt that the two uses would be in classrooms, whether it was the British House of Commons or the House of Representatives or the Senate filibuster, to bring into a classroom to make it real for students. Or we didn't know where this research would go. And that's why this research conference is so exciting, because we thought there would be ways that people could use the material to research rhetoric, floor behavior, campaigns, but that's why I think and that's what this conference is so exciting about, is to see the ways that people have creatively turned the collection into research.
Lindsay Anderson, from your perspective in the classroom at the University of Maryland, what do you see students' relationship with media, with television, with visuals?
That's a great question. So I oversee COM 107, which is the equivalent to COM 114. And we ask students to learn how to do presentational speaking in their civic, personal, academic, and professional lives. And to be able to see examples of how these skills we're teaching them in the classroom are applied in real world settings is just incredibly important. And using the media and having the C-SPAN archive serve as that exemplar is so important to the students to have that visual representation.
Jen Hall, you have 4 children, 3 of them are all the same age, triplets. What do you see their relationship to television today?
It's very interesting because I would say their primary news source is not TV. And I hate to say this, it's TikTok. But that really is. And then their interaction with TV, they have lived their entire lives where everything's on demand. And so this concept of being a show or going back and watching a show. But one thing that's been really interesting in the last year is they've gotten really into Saturday Night Live, and they actually stay up and watch it live on Saturday night. And that's the first time I've ever known them to do that. But like, they never watch the news. They just scroll through Twitter or, again, TikTok.
Robert Browning would tell you that his archive was probably one of the first on-demand facilities in television in history, because it's over, well, how many years are we talking about right now? 34, Robert?
Yes, that's right.
And we were lucky enough to be able to stream back in the middle 90s, which was the first one to probably do that. Anya, you graduated from Purdue. You're at George Washington University. What's your relationship with television? How and as Jen says, has it always been that you've been on demand with your television?
So when I was younger, I used to watch like television live. I used to stay up and like wait for it to come on. I obviously like reruns were a thing, but like I wouldn't wait for the reruns. I would just stay up and watch it. But nowadays, sometimes I won't even watch like full episodes of television or full things. I'll watch it afterwards and I'll only watch clips. So I'll only see like pieces of it. And I guess that's a lot different than when I was growing up. So I can't imagine what it would be like for kids nowadays who have never really had to stay up and watch something. Probably a very different experience.
Got to go back to Marifran Mattson. Marifran, tell us your own experience of watching students change over the last 30 years that you've been teaching.
Yeah, so I think in general, there's some things about students who has remained the same. I would say, you know, I came to Purdue 25 plus years ago now, and one of the things I continue to appreciate about students is how polite they are and how much they respect their instructors, their professors, the people who help us out in our departments make things happen, and the relationships they form with us. That's been pretty impressive, and I really think that continues. But I think use of media would probably be one of the most major changes that I've seen in students, and, you know, kind of what we've talked about, how they capture media, how they use it in the presentations that they give, how another thing about students, and I think this is related to their media use, is how much easier they seem to be willing to present themselves. Most students don't seem to get as nervous to do a presentation. And I think in part that might be because of TikTok, for example, where they're making the TikTok videos and doing those things all the time. Whereas when I was a student, it was a big deal to have to prepare and give a speech in a class. I just think their experience to that is very different now. So those are some things that have stayed the same and some things that have really changed.
There aren't probably many people on this screen that can relate to what I'm going to tell you about my upbringing there in Lafayette, Indiana, at Purdue University. But when I was at Purdue I graduated in 63, before most of you were born. And in 62, I did a television show on the local channel 18. Here's how far things have come. The television show was called Dance Date. It was fashioned after American Bandstand. We had one Vidicon camera, which, for those of you who don't know what Vidicon is, it's the lesser of the camera. The image orthogon camera back then was a lot more expensive. We had one. We had dancers in the studio. They were from high school every day. I was fortunate to do this because I could build the sets, sell the time, host the program. It didn't work. It was a failure. And we had to shut her down on a day-to-day basis and go only to one day a week on Fridays. And then we shut the show down completely after on one Friday, none of the dancers showed up. So we really, I mean, I started from scratch. And so now that I carry around my iPhone and can video anything that I see, and I have 67,000 photos on my phone, my world is consumed by the new technology. So it's interesting to hear you all reflect on the younger crowd. Jared McDonald, what are you hearing that you want to comment on?
I think that the last point about sort of self-presentation was a very interesting one. You know, I'm working with sort of a group of advanced undergraduates who are research assistants at the political psychology research group, and they were commenting on this actually the people that they see like coming into the university now, like I don't know how everyone else's experience was in undergrad, but it was very common, show up in sweatpants or whatever. and that people are coming out of class very prepared, that they've actually, they seem very much interested in the way they are presenting themselves, even if they're sitting at the back of the classroom, in a way that wasn't necessarily the case when I was an undergraduate. And even for some of the advanced undergraduates, it definitely does seem like things have shifted quite a bit. And so that was one thing that just sort of came directly to my mind as we were talking about this. But just in terms of the broader kind of contribution of the C-SPAN archive, I'll just add one other thing, which I think is what I've really valued, which is looking at it from the point of view of sort of mass communication, how messages are received by the masses. There's all sorts of theories about the way people are supposed to talk in order to appeal to a mass electorate. And what the C-SPAN video archives allow us to do is to see, are politicians actually behaving in ways that we might expect them to, based on the incentives. We just, it's one of those things, we've had these theories that have been built up over decades, and I don't know a lot of people who are necessarily looking and seeing whether or not politicians are responding to incentive structures the way we might expect. And this is something that the archives really allow us to dig into and look at, both in terms of visual presentation, but also in terms of the specific words that are being used.
Jared, are you at Stanford today?
I am right now at home, which is why the lighting is so poor. But I will be heading up to campus in a little bit.
So you're in Palo Alto, or
Yeah.
near there. Okay. What for a generalist like me, what's an incentive structure?
So, for example, there are lots of theories about how the regular citizens who are viewing political messages will engage in some sort of gender stereotyping. That the same message from a man would be received differently if it came from a woman, and there are all sorts of expectations about the types of language we expect to see a specific person use, or the type of rhetoric we would expect them to use based on their visible attributes. And yet we don't necessarily have good research, I don't believe, based that tells us sort of, are politicians actually censoring in ways that we might expect from, kind of the biases that are out there in the masses.
Katie Brownell, what has television done to the study of history?
Hi, Brian, and hi, everyone. It's so great to see everyone. Yes, I'm a historian, and I study media and political history. And I think that one of the really fascinating things that we've seen as historians is that television has become a political institution and a political tool. And that's something that I look at in my work. And I think that historians talk about television a lot and they reference it a lot, but they don't actually study it and really study the policies that shape it as an institution, the ways in which activists and politicians and the everyday American experience public affairs and news and understand politics and use it to engage with one another. And so I think one of the exciting things about the conference that's happening over the next 2 days is that we have a panel of historians that are actually actively studying the development of television as a political institution. And I know Heather's work really looks at conventions and kind of what goes into the nuts and bolts of how politics is covered. Again, really emphasizing that people are making choices. They have assumptions about power and authority that go into those choices of how they use television. And then that shapes the way people understand and experience politics.
Well, since I've been at C-SPAN for the last 40 years, one of the things that I've been able to do, and it's been the highlight of my life, is to interview a lot of historians. And I have to say, Robert, thank you, because by having the archive, if I'm interviewing somebody, I'll go back in the archive and look up an earlier appearance that they had, and I can get their tempo, I can hear what they have to say about different things. And it really is, it makes a big difference when you're interviewing somebody. Let me ask Caitlin Brooks, where are you today?
I'm over in Beering.
And what is your interest in what we're talking about here?
I'm a graduate student in the department studying political communication. So I've largely been interested in how Congress members try to communicate policies to the public. And one thing that interests me is that often when they try to share what they do in Congress, they often use a lot of C-SPAN clips, either edited into like their own sort of clips from often the archives noticed, but also seeing how they translate their much more jargon congressional floor speeches to the public.
I should point out to everyone that when we started, nobody had the ability to record and send out on the internet their clips to their constituency. However, the television stations who had bureaus here, and a lot of them have been shut down, would take it from the floor feed from C-SPAN and send it out to their stations, and then they could use a clip from a 1-minute speech. I'm not sure how that goes on today, except to know that the offices, the individual offices of Congress people can do that very thing, ship it out on the internet, and hope that they use it on the news. Connie Devley, before we go to other professors, you were at Purdue for 4 years. You're not an academic. You ran the CCSE. What is your takeaway about academia after 4 years at Purdue?
I think in terms of the CCSE, what I saw and what I see is this ongoing need to integrate the students into things like the archives, and also to integrate professors more into the archives. That there is still a hesitancy to take video like the C-SPAN archives into the classroom and into the syllabus, and to really do what the students are doing, which is live their life on video, right? And so I think that that is a challenge for academia to kind of almost catch up to the students in a way, in a technological way. I guess that's what I would say. And I have to tell you, Brian, I was one of those press secretaries in 1980 who used to put the microphone over the edge of the old television set and record the member of Congress when he went to the floor, and then make those feeds out to the radio stations. So indeed, it hasn't been all that long. Well, I guess it has been a while, 40 years since that was all being done. And now it's a totally different thing.
Yeah, I think I was frozen during that time, and I could not hear you. So let's just,
I'm sorry.
it says on my screen, my internet connection is unstable, which says a lot about C-SPAN and its internet system, which this isn't the first time this has happened. Newly Powell, how about you? Tell us what you're hearing that you want to comment on.
Hello, everyone. So I teach journalism at the University of North Texas, and I was following the conversation this morning with a lot of interest. For the past 4 or 5 years, I've been teaching some introduction to journalism classes, and every time my students come in, it's a large class of about 350 odd students. And every time at the start of the semester, I normally ask them an open-ended question about what their favored sources of news are. And over the years, I've seen about 95% of the students will say that they get their news from YouTube, from social media. And some people these days have started talking about newsletters. So I think news that is very specifically catered to people's interests, that kind of news has a lot of, I would say, scope, because people are definitely not looking to just consume anything and everything. They're just looking for specific things that interest them. So that's something I've noticed in terms of news consumption. And we were talking just now about how the archives are so useful. I completely agree with that. I teach these introduction to reporting classes where we learn about the art of interviewing. And I found it very useful to use clips from the archive, because there are a lot of journalists there who conduct interviews with their subjects. And I found that my students can get a lot of information from just listening to those interviews, just watching those clips, because they're so varied. The journalists come from a lot of different backgrounds, and the people they're interviewing are also from different fields. So there's a lot to learn there in how the journalists ask them questions, how they ask follow-up questions, and how they conduct these interviews. So I've definitely found those kinds of clips very interesting and useful for my classes.
One of the interesting things, I consider myself a journalist, is watching people who aren't journalists in the last 40 years who get to be seen questioning people, whether in Congress or in a think tank or whatever, that some of them are better than journalists in asking questions, which is always very rewarding when you're a viewer. Joshua Guitar, where are you today? And what would you like to say about what we're talking about?
Hello, I'm in the mountains of northern Georgia at Young Harris College. I also enjoyed the conversation so far and this project and the conference and all the lead up. A number of different nuggets from the conversation have sparked my interest. Obviously, student engagement and their ability to present or produce material in the classroom and how it's changing. I've been teaching for 10 years, and there was a lot of communication apprehension. I remember from for the students in those first years of teaching, but recently they've been much more apt to creating presentations and speaking in public. In fact, one time in class, someone was nervous and one of the classmates said, just pretend you're making a YouTube video. And it calmed them down. It was very fascinating how that seemed, it was the opposite for me. I was like, no, I would never want to pretend I'm making a YouTube video. I'll just reiterate how strong the C-SPAN archives are as a resource. Myself, diving in more deeply as a rhetorician who studies political communication and the processes of democracy. I've always been interested in C-SPAN, but diving more deeply into the archives with this project has really opened my eyes in some ways. And I like, I don't know if I say I like the entertainment value, but I can see a clear shift from the older sessions of congressional hearings where we focused our attention to the newer ones, and how our congresspersons are so much more cognizant of media that are present and are priming their messages for that media presence. And that level of interaction that is created is just fascinating to me as a student and a scholar of political communication.
One of the moments I'll always remember, Robert, is when our camera had zoomed in on John McCain playing poker on his iPhone, and some people probably on his staff got upset. He didn't get upset, but this was during a hearing, and that's not our role. It's inadvertent, but we run into that all the time because it makes it very real. Jennifer Hopper, where are you? And give us some insight.
Sure. I am currently at home in Queens in New York City, but I teach in New Haven, Connecticut. So the Northeast is generally where I am. I was just thinking as we talked, everyone was talking about sort of students and C-SPAN and their engagement with media and being so different in recent years, that one thing that often strikes me is I teach and have taught for a long time an introductory American government course that is required for many students. And so they're not in there for their love of politics or political science. They're there to fulfill a requirement in many cases. And, 10 or 12 years ago, when I used to ask them if they had seen a portion of a president's speech or a piece of a congressional hearing or something that happened on the floor of Congress that got a lot of attention in the news, just blank faces, no reaction. If they were not consuming a lot of political news, then they probably would have no exposure to it whatsoever. So you'd have to explain it or, show a clip, et cetera. And then I find in more recent years that if you ask them about these high profile moments, because they've often gone viral on social media or they've been widely shared in those kinds of venues, suddenly they have seen that primary recording of a major politician, maybe sometimes making a mistake, or sometimes it's that they're strategically trying to drive home a particular point that just got a lot of attention. And a lot of those clips are from C-SPAN. So it's almost as though there's social media allows for more exposure of maybe not hours and hours of programming, but particular pieces that then people share on Twitter or on TikTok or on Instagram, et cetera. And so there's, it's almost like more people are seeing that now, and more younger people, they are exposed to it, even if they themselves don't have an interest in politics. Even celebrities that they follow on social media might be sharing those kinds of moments. So it's just sort of, it's counterintuitive in a way that with the proliferation and the fragmentation of the media today, some of that is getting through to a greater extent than maybe it did a decade or so ago.
One thing that I've noticed that has changed, and this is a very simple thing, but when I watch the hearings, almost everybody has been trained, the witnesses, for some strange reason. I don't get it. They all say to every member of the Senate and the House, when they ask a question, "Thank you for your question, Senator." I don't know where somebody somewhere has that in a book that says thank them for all their questions. It drives me crazy. And if I were a member, I would say, hold off the thanking business. Just answer the question. Dr. Bleem, tell us where you are and give us your reaction. You're muted. Still muted.
Sense.
There you go.
Now?
There you go.
Wonderful. I'm at home in Adrian, Michigan. I most particularly enjoyed the discussion of the idea of communication across generations. And I believe that was at the beginning of this discussion, say 9 to 9:20 this morning. The reason that I enjoyed that is because it's always been my policy to try to get the different generations, and we've both seen a lot of them, especially in the classroom for myself, to face the same direction. That is, for example, when you're driving in a car with someone, it's easier to talk to them because you're both facing in the same direction, experiencing similar visual and perhaps auditory things. I think that the C-SPAN archive allows me to work with students and put us all facing in the same direction and ask the most important question: what do you see here? What's of relevance? What stands out? And take the conversation from there. That is a good deal of what we did with our particular paper project for this conference.
Dr. Bleem, 25 years ago, when I was on the board of Borders Bookstore, which is right there and it used to be in Ann Arbor, Michigan, one of the reasons that I was excited about being on that board, and it was just a couple of years and I wasn't very important to the process, but to learn, and I want to ask Robert to follow up on this, to learn that sales through the year in a Borders bookstore, 70% of them were somebody coming into the bookstore and buying one book one time. 30% were the bestsellers, buying multiple copies. What's the statistic, Robert, for the archive, and how many people come in and watch a significant versus multiple people watching one event?
It's what we call in the field the long tail. The people come in, they find one thing. I mean, it's probably the same kind of statistic that there's 30% that come back all the time and are looking at different things. But it's also, everybody's looking at something different. I mean, if you go to the Borders or today to the Walmart, there's a stack of books and they're all buying those same books, but it's not that. It's more the Amazon phenomena where everybody is looking at something different.
Eric Busey, what are you thinking?
Thinking a lot of things, but Brian, I just want to say thank you for your years of service on C-SPAN, and I've watched your interviews over the years, over the decades, really, and I always appreciated your unflappable and to the point style. I wish more journalists and interviewers would follow it rather than going for theatrics or gotcha moments and just get the facts out. So I've always valued C-SPAN's kind of neutrality in that sense. And in my graduate work, I actually worked with John Splain a little bit, who used to be fastidious about the C-SPAN camera angle being a medium shot and neither up nor down, so as not to favor or disfavor any member on the floor. And that was really kind of, eye-opening compared to commercial media. So what I'm picking up from the discussion is a couple different things. One is a lack of awareness and appreciation for television as still, in my mind, the dominant medium, regardless of how it's chopped up and distributed and TikToked and recycled and mashed up and put together. It's still TV, unless it's, maybe homegrown user-generated content, then it might not be TV, but even that stuff shows up on TV. So I think the industry could do a little bit better job promoting the value of television to society. And of course, C-SPAN provides a tremendous service to civic affairs and is underappreciated. And that leads to kind of the second point, which is there's a lot of inadvertent exposure to political and civic content that a lot of audiences, particularly younger audiences, aren't always aware of, where it's coming from, what the source is, what they're actually consuming, whether it's valid. So I think we can do a better job as academics, kind of teaching that kind of, critical literacy is just to realize what the source is and be more proactive about your sources rather than letting the news find you, which is increasingly the case. I hear this a lot from focus groups. I have my students almost every semester convene a group of 5 or so, family and friends, around a particular political topic of interest at that time. And it's fascinating. I always start to kind of, I draw out the protocol and they run through a list of prepared questions, more or less. And the opening discussion is about media use. And the way that people talk about media now basically means their social media feed, particularly younger audiences, but even older audiences as well. And we need to be careful about that because the traditional legacy networks and content providers are getting lost in the mix, and they shouldn't. They're still the dominant sources of news and information. They should be appreciated as such. So that's kind of my desire there. And just quickly on the research side, I see growing utility of video. And it's kind of exciting. I've used C-SPAN video in experiments and focus groups and all kinds of other research, empirical and qualitative. What's going on today is the move of the computational scientists into the video space and through computer vision techniques. I'll be talking a little bit about this tomorrow, but Robert, myself, and Devon Shaw at Madison, Wisconsin, are hoping to set up a C-SPAN data co-op where we provide some presidential debate footage and then some coding of the nonverbal behavior, the tonal aspects, and even some of the rhetorical aspects of these encounters, and then show how you can link it with Twitter and other social media to use the coding of the presidential debates to actually predict or at least to correlate with what's going on in social media. All this is made possible through the digitization of video content, but then the interest of computational scientists in this kind of space. So it's an exciting time to be in research, and I'm glad to be here when it's happening.
Eric, thanks for your comments about our interview style here, but I have to tell you, there's only one reason we can do this. That's because we don't make money for anybody. And I'm serious. I mean, we had a wonderful guy that worked here, actually came to work for us when he was 18 years old. He had no college experience, still doesn't to this day. And he left us and went to work for, I'm not going to tell you which one it is, no reason to do that, but it's a left-leaning, well-known news network. And he was producer of a segment every weekend on a particular program. And he brought with him, this is not a moral thing, he brought with him, though, the idea that we could go into in-depth on a particular subject. So he goes to the production meeting when they decide, and he says, why don't we today, let's say, this is exaggeration, talk about trucks and how they transport the supply line around the United States. And this was about 2 years ago. And the executive producer waved him off and said, no, this will be a Trump segment. And he found himself always finding that at a liberal leaning network, that they always would go to a Trump segment because the next day they look at the ratings and then they sell the advertising. So we don't, we're lucky to have the kind of income stream that we do here and don't have to make money. I'm not sure how long it lasts in the long-term business, but you got to know that the reason why the others do what they do is they make an extraordinary amount of money. When you can pay somebody like Rachel Maddow $30 million for 1 year, you can see what it's all about. And she does a good job with what she does. And she does have an hour to develop a story, but that's highly unusual. And people go to her because they like her politics. I want to ask Andrea Langrish, who is brand new to the job as the head of the CCSE, to tell us from your perspective. First of all, you taught school, and what years did you teach?
I taught the early elementary to 4th grade. My pulling out point was when they got taller than me.
And how old are your children today?
My daughter is 18. She's a freshman at Purdue, Fort Wayne, and my son is 14, and he is a freshman in high school.
So you find yourself in this new job that has to do with C-SPAN and students and engagement. What is your own goal, and how do you look at television yourself?
So really, honestly, my goal is to get more students aware of C-SPAN as a resource, because as many people pointed out, we are getting our students so focused in echo chambers of information that they aren't able to see a policy issue or politics from one side or the other. They're stuck in their one little groove. So that's a big one for me. And also getting a lot more of the scholars open to using the resource. I think some of the presentations that we're going to see today are incredible. I'm fortunate, I got to see a sneak peek of almost every single one of them. So I'm excited about that. And then overall, I mean, when it comes to TV at this point, I don't have a whole lot of time, but I do catch up on my news every single morning. And this is something that I will credit Connie with doing, and that is putting me onto news sources that you can connect with in the morning with morning topics that come up into your email or morning alerts, so that you can go and click on a news story and follow it up. And it's been very interesting to have that as a secondary resource.
Robert, the archive is now run by you, but how many people now do you have working in the archive, and where do you keep the archival material?
Well, we had a number of people leave recently, and we're mostly the technical side. And we have about 7 people, 3 catalogers who index, and 3 developers. That's pretty much the staff. Everything has transitioned to the cloud, as they say. And the last piece that we had a big fancy robot. We moved all that material to 6 petabytes to Amazon cloud. We have the servers at Amazon. So all the video, you don't know this, Brian, but when you go to Netflix, you're looking at the video that's right next to the storage of C-SPAN. They're both using the same services. And a lot of people are using Amazon Web Services for serving video. And the most recent addition that we're making is, and a lot of it came about from COVID, because we haven't really been in the office for almost 1.5 years, and everything's running, and we're moving the recording to the points of presence where C-SPAN goes to the satellite. And that will allow us to have a very baked in recording right at the point where the signal goes to the cloud or to the satellite, and it will go to the cloud for us. And so so in the long term, where we are, we're in West Lafayette, Indiana, but it wouldn't really matter. Our people are all working from home and are programming from home and are cataloging from home.
I should tell our group here that C-SPAN itself right now, and our headquarters are blocked from the Senate office buildings, and there might be in this company today 10 people. Might be. It depends. I mean, things have become automated. On the weekends, 2 of our networks are completely automated, and everything's in the cloud. And as we look to the future, I mean, we've just downsized here for a lot of reasons. And of course, COVID means that this place is empty. I've come in every day. It's just a way of life. I've been doing it all my life. So I came to the office. But a lot of our people, including people that are doing the announcing, some of the people that are doing the scheduling, and if we could, we would even be able to do the master control operation from somebody's home, which is entirely possible. It's just been very interesting. It's a very different feel than it was when we started, and a very different feel from what it was 5 years ago. We have about 10 minutes left, and I'm going to just ask the people that are on screen, because a lot of people aren't, so I don't know if you're there. And golly, I wouldn't want to embarrass you by calling on you if you're not on the screen, but if any of you want to pop up so I can see you, I'd love to hear what you had to say. But those of you who are on screen and know you're on screen, what have you heard from the others that you might want to comment on, if anything, at this point? Because I know you're always thinking about what people are saying. Lindsay, I can tell you got, oh, okay, Jared, go ahead.
Well, I was just curious because I've heard a lot of people talk about seeing, people getting their news from, TikTok, or actually no one's mentioned Twitter, but maybe that I'm too old now. Or YouTube. But I'm curious for those people who commented on that. I think of those as sort of black boxes. Like you have legitimate news sources that have accounts on these social media sites. I was wondering kind of what the content of the news or what sort of trusted sources people had seen. Some of the sort of younger, undergraduates and high school students, like where they're gravitating on those platforms.
Let me jump to Anya because she's still a student. What is your most trusted source of where you go for your information and news?
I guess people nowadays, like kids and students, we don't really have trusted sources. Not in the same way that like we might have in the past, where there's like a reliable news source. Honestly, if your friend posts something on Twitter or if you see something on TikTok, like you take that at face value and then you go look into it. You see, is anybody else saying this? Is this coming from anywhere else? It isn't, oh, CNN posted this, or oh, Fox News posted this, or oh, this news source posted this, and therefore like I find it reliable. It's somebody I know posted this, or this is trending right now, and so I'm going to look into it. It's not really like which sources do you trust, which I think is probably a lot different than, how it used to be.
Yes.
Who else has a comment? Put your hand up. I know you have things to say.
I'll jump in, Brian. So I see this again with my girls. So my girls are 15 and 13. And I would agree, it's not necessarily a trusted source. The other thing we keep running into with them is my husband a lot of times they'll like bring something up and we'll be like, well, how did you know that? And they're like, oh, this person I follow on TikTok. And it does turn out we make them go look it up and it is correct. But their takeaway is, see, mom, TikTok's reliable. And so we're trying to like do that. And the other thing I really noticed over the last year, and I do think this is because like younger people have so much access, is that polarization is happening at a very young age. I'll just share this. My 3 7th graders last year got in trouble because on Snapchat, I don't know, they have so many platforms. They were bullying someone apparently, which I don't approve of, but it was somebody that was an anti-masker. And like, they're having these whole conversations and, but I can see it already. They're also following the people who echo their ideas. So it's just been really interesting and hard to navigate as someone who didn't have 50 social media platforms when I was a teenager.
Lindsay, I called you earlier. You got anything to add here?
You do. And I'm just going to add to the conversation that Anya and Jen have started. And it's this idea of going back to the opening statement, information overload, right? We have all these different platforms and all these different speakers. And yes, we can get stuck in an echo chamber that reinforces our ideas. And so, again, I'm going back to my family now. I have very young daughters. They're 4 and they're 8. And I was telling them about what my day is going to look like today. And I was like, do you know what C-SPAN is? And the older one knew it was a network, but she didn't know what it was. And I was like, okay, so it's transparent coverage of the government, right? And it's like our civic duty to know what's going on in the government. It's the coverage of it. And she asked how it's different than the nightly news, because we do watch nightly news as a family, like the kids are playing. They're not really watching Lester Holt, but they hear it. And I was like, you don't have that framing. You don't have that commentary. What you have is a place where you can go to figure out what's going on, that you have that transparent, or I think it was described as neutrality earlier, of what is going on in your government. And I think that that's so important when we do get stuck in these echo chambers, or when we do have these multitude of platforms, to be able to have one source where it's reliable and credible and very, very transparent in how it's produced.
Of course, we always think that the most reliable source is the whole speech. And for Jen and Lindsay and others who teach speech, and from my standpoint, this is a government run by speeches. If you think about the campaigns, if it wasn't for speeches, in a lot of cases, the television medium wouldn't have anywhere to go. The print medium still goes into some depth of people's backgrounds. But the thing I always used this place for, and I probably watch it just like everybody else, I don't watch it linearly. A lot of people here think that people watch our networks linearly. They sit down and watch the next 3 hours. Never happens. Just doesn't happen. We know from the statistics, but when you're in television, that's the way you think. What I do is when I see something on the evening news or on one of the channels that covers news, I can then go to our archive and watch the whole thing if I want to, and I do it all the time. And then you get, that was the reason the place was founded, so you can get the whole thing when you want it. And the beauty is that we can do that with, as Robert would say, 271,000 hours of history that are available. It's just getting people to stop long enough to want to take the time, which, as you know, not many people do. Who else has a quick comment as we get, yes, Eric.
Oops, sorry, I had to unmute. So I agree with all this, and I'm observing it as well. And the polarization and kind of fixation on individual sources is really troubling to me at a young age. I think we need to collectively counter this somehow, and the answer is actually in the room, and it's already being offered in schools. We just need to make it a requirement. I've thought a lot about this in relation to my work on misinformation and literacy, which is, I think we need to start requiring journalism as a fundamental skills class. And you know, you can say, well, you pick it up through consuming media, but you really don't. I've done studies, and the people who consume media may have very strong opinions about it, but they don't. That doesn't mean they understand the procedures and operations of the press. And if you understand the process, you're much more equipped to identify and spot the suspect content, and to not want to share it, and to not want to engage with it. And if you don't understand the process, then you go for the most persuasive argument. And that's the two other communication requirements that are absolutely essential in every high school and college is public speaking and composition. To me, those develop the skill of argumentation, not of listening, not of verifying facts, not of doing what journalism does. So that would be my pitch.
I like it because I can tell you this, there should be a course, if there isn't already, maybe somebody teaches it. It's all about where does the money come from to support all these media institutions? And then you'd understand why they do what they do. Mm-hmm. I have to say the Washington Post last week committed real journalism when they took a whack at Blue Origin, a company that is owned by the owner, Jeff Bezos of the Post, and they really let him have it. And that's highly unusual in journalism. You almost never see that. And when you do, you got to say, okay, you get a gold star for that. Because so many times all these journalistic institutions cover up their faults and their mistakes. And so it's follow the doggone money and you'll figure out why people do what they do. And I've learned that from the time I was at Purdue until this time in my young life. We are 2 minutes out. If there's anybody that has a final comment, Marifran, you have a semi-smile on your face. Do you have a last comment for this hour?
I've really just enjoyed the conversation and appreciate everyone's participation. I think it kind of goes to show what we're in for over the next couple of days. So thank you, Brian, for getting us started and getting the conversation going among us. So let's continue that as the conference continues.
I would say to you all that we thank you very much, because I think Robert would agree with this and everybody else that's been involved in the C-SPAN archive, that our dream was that people like you would use it. That's all. You know, it's free, and we've been lucky to be able to provide it free. And if you don't use it, then it doesn't mean anything. And there's so much history there. So thank you for being interested, and you're far more interested than most people. And that we appreciate. And I think it's probably time for me to say goodbye and wish you all have a great conference. And thanks for including me, and hope to see you next year.